Friends, here we are, another Q&A video, this one for September 2023. Got lots of really good questions this month. I'm going to focus in on just a few of them, and we're going to turn one of them into next month's advanced class. So that's cool. I actually rely a lot on questions and things that you all are working on and are interested in to fuel upcoming content. So please always let me know what you're doing, what you're into, what you're excited about, what you're frustrated by, because I put it to work. So first question from Mike. This is an awesome question. I've actually wanted to talk a little bit about this before, so I'm really glad Mike brought this up. And he's asking about working with cinnamon basil, right? So from the name, it's going to seem like cinnamon basil is going to be, maybe an ornamental or a variegation or landscaping cultivar, but this is actually a pretty established iteration of basil. It is technically a cultivar, but has a scientific name, a botanical classification, which I think is Ocimum basilicum cinnamon, right? So there's a cultivar classification there within the species name. But the reason why this is such a cool question is because it opens the discussion about variegations and cultivars, right? How do we work with them? How do we connect with them? Because chances are we're not going to see much about them in the established or extant plant lore, right? Now, cinnamon basil actually could have some lore around this plant only because it's been around for a really long time, and there are even some sort of folkloric name issues that I ran into in researching this plant where certain forms of Thai basil, or a basil indigenous to Thailand and surrounding areas, is called cinnamon basil because of the fragrance and flavor. But cinnamon basil is really its own plant. So one of the cool parts of this question is that Mike wanted to know about energetics, right? And I think next to the scientific name, which we have in this case, the energetics are another really good angle because it can help us understand, by reading the lore, by reading medicinal virtues or magical applications about regular basil or, Ocimum basilicum, how much can we glean from that sort of parent plant about this cultivar, right? And in this case, a lot. There are established with cinnamon basil only because so many of the volatile and essential oils and active compounds in this plant are the same as Ocimum basilicum. So I would say on the energetic level, definitely warming and definitely stimulating, meaning that this is a plant that will move things just like regular basil, right? There's definitely going to be an affinity here with the respiratory and upper respiratory systems, kind of getting the lungs moving out mucus, thinning and moving things out of the lungs, getting gunk out. But also with that methyl cinnamate, which is the compound that gives cinnamon basil that cinnamony fragrance and taste, we're probably also going to see a little bit more of a pronounced blood moving effect and maybe even some lymphatic moving effect because of that particular compound. So very similar to basil, right? And so here we have a plant, a cultivar, that we're probably not going to find mentioned in existing plant lore, right? And if we do, it's going to be kind of obscure. And we want to work with that plant, or that plant wants to work with us. So first and foremost, work with the plant, right? Let the plant teach you. You could be the person who writes the monograph about this plant or establishes this plant within the occult botany community by talking about the plant or doing a class on them, or writing a monograph or writing spell work around this plant. So when they want to have their time in the limelight, they will find people who will help facilitate that, right? So that could be what's going on too. The other thing is, again, we can lean into a similar plant or the parent plant that shares that scientific binomial classification, Ocimum basilicum, to get information about what some of the deeper energetics with this plant might be. recognizing that this plant is different, right? We can't, in a sorcerous way, and shouldn't, in my opinion, approach these cultivars as the same, right? I wouldn't say, oh, cinnamon basil is just regular basil dressed up for Halloween. No, I would approach them as completely different spirits. And if we're wrong and cinnamon basil is just a different expression of basil, no harm, no foul. But it's better to be safe than sorry, right? We would rather honor each plant spirit individually until they show us otherwise. So cultivars are cool. Study the parent plants, look at the scientific names, and see if you can trace that back to a plant that is the originator of whatever cultivars came through. And of course, trust your own experiences about these plants, because especially with plants like cinnamon basil, very safe to work with. You could tincture this plant, you could make incense. I'm actually thinking about making that happen. Do journey work with the plant. All of that makes total sense with this plant because it's a safer plant to work with in that way. So the sky's the limit. One bit of sort of contemporary plant lore that has evolved around this plant that I want to share before we move on, because it's cool, is that the Ocimum basilicum cinnamon plant cultivar is the plant that was chosen to go on Space Shuttle Endeavour to the low Earth orbit of the space station and be grown in experiment. So this is a plant that is growing in space right now. So there you go. Thanks, Mike. Awesome question. Let's move on to one that a few people asked, actually, which is, winter's just around the corner. What are we going to do with ourselves when the plants die back, when they retreat? Sharon asked a really good question with really good points about going out in the wintertime and being able to engage with trees, but not really feeling their presence, not really feeling responsive, and maybe even feeling like they kind of just want to be left alone, right? Because the winter is their sleep. It's their nighttime. It's the nighttime of the year, the wheel of the year. And it's when the trees and all plants, with the exception of some evergreens, have retreated from our side of the hedge, up here in the canopy. They've gone back down into the roots, into their world, into the mystery, into the darkness, into the unseen. And so it's very common, I think, for people to experience this feeling of like, just leave them alone, right? Let them do what they're going to do. Let them rest. And I think that's a sweet sentiment. And I feel that too sometimes. And I think for the most part, I probably honor it because I do a ton of work with plants in the winter, but not so much out in person. You know, certainly if I go on winter hikes and all of that, I show them love. And we even have some existing folkloric plant rituals that start as early as January of wassailing the trees and pouring cider for the trees and kind of warming the soil and blessing the orchards and all of that and calling them back. And that's happening when it's still technically winter. But I understand and support this idea of if you feel like they need space or it's just them time, cool. You don't have to do nothing though. In fact, sometimes I feel busier in the winter, and here's why. And this is, by the way, this question is, I'm going to do next month's advanced class on this. So if you want some like more ideas and then really practical how-to guidance, that's going to be our October 2023 advanced class on Patreon. So you can get access to that down below. So here are a few things that we can do in the wintertime to stay connected while also, you know, honoring the process that the plants are doing. First, winter is the dark time of the year. It is a time of slowing down. Everything slows down. Nature slows down. It's a time of rest and being indoors more. And the symbolism of bear and cave and hibernation is an invitation for us to be a little more introspective, to kind of go within, right, a bit, which is very cool. So I really like wintertime as a time to catch up on study, to take classes, to go to workshops, to revisit important books, to go back through my notebooks, to study, right? Because you're sometimes trapped inside. Here where I am, it gets very, very cold and we get a lot of snow. And sometimes there are weeks on end where being outside is just not good, right? So we can study the plants and learn about them in this time when we're a little more physically sedate, but oftentimes we're a little more creatively active, right? So that can be very cool. This is a really good opportunity too for just reflection, meditation, writing, journaling, working on grimoires, on collages, on whatever. Again, it's kind of keeping you indoors, but you're still engaged with the plants, and it's going to honor the work you did with them in the growing season and then act as fuel for the work you will do in the following growing season. So, both of the books that I wrote were written over the wintertime because that's when I'm willing to sit at a desk for hours on end writing, right? I'm not really going to do that when it's nice out. So as the body slows down, the physical body, during the winter, and we kind of enter into that hibernation mode, this can also be a really good time for us to refine our abilities around spirit flight, around creative visualization, around journey work, learning how to drum, learning how to travel by spirit, how to work on our inner visual capacities. Very supported during this time of year, right? And when we're doing things that are resonant with the season, we find a more ease and deeper initiation. So there's that. I also, use winter as a time to make medicine. I make more medicine over the winter than I do any other time of the year. I've brought all my herbs in from harvest. I've done all of my foraging, and now I have herbs drying, hanging, some in the food dehydrator, some that have already been dried and I've got in little bags. So now winter offers me that time to turn those herbs into tinctures, to turn them into oils and salves, and to craft incense and all of that. So my hands technically are maybe in more direct contact with the plants over the winter than they are in the growing season, right? So that's an interesting sort of juxtaposition, that while the plants are active and growing and on our side, our work, tends to be around them, right? But in winter, it's kind of when we get our hands into them. So that's really interesting. You could consider ways to work with dried and preserved herbs from harvest, in all kinds of ways, making vinegars and honeys and electuaries and oxymels and ciders and all of that. It's all perfect wintertime activities. Evergreens, go out and find the plants that stay here. Find the plants that stand outside of that normal cycle of birth and death, and they kind of hang out all the time here. The pines, the evergreens, these and different things. There's always plants to go, be surprised that they are thriving and even growing. And, in the case of one of my closest plant spirit allies, juniper, will even create pollen in, what we would consider kind of late winter, early spring. Where I am, it's still so cold. And juniper's like, cool, let's pollen up, which is great because those early spring moths, and as the bees, eventually wake up, juniper is making sure they're fed, right? Without that, there would be really hard for those creatures. So finally, I'll leave you with this, and this is an aspect we're going to get into more in the advanced class, which is, what does it look like to engage with the other face of a plant spirit, right? So not take a tree, for example, not the tree lush with leaves and flowers and seeds and berries and maybe fruit, but the tree barren and silent and still. The tree that is engaged with the darker side of life, right? They have moved through the hedge. They have in effect died or passed through the veil, although we understand with plants that they will be reborn again, right? That's their teaching. There's more mystery here. And it doesn't mean we have to go out and shake them. We can do it from the comfort of our living room. But to engage with that sort of face of the plant spirits, just like we see in a lot of the green deities, agricultural deities, that while they tend to be represented by fecundity and spring and flowers and growth and plants, they always also have a dark side. that could be fermentation, rot, decay, alcohol, preservation, death, and rebirth. There's an invitation to go into that stuff. And, winter is harsh. And sometimes there's an energy about the plants that also can feel a little harsh, that when this softness is taken out of the canopy and the hedgerows and it's just sticks, right? Just bare sticks that against the sky will sometimes look like antlers, right? Wink, wink. There's a whole thing we could go into right there. It's a little different energy, and there's an invitation to engage with who the plants are in May and who they are in November, right? So thank you for those questions, the folks that participated with that question. So cool. And next month, we're going to do this and go in deeper. I think that'll be a good advanced class. So watch for that. Let's do one more from Pip. Houseplants. Relationships with plants that are not centered around magic and medicine. So our houseplants that we never intend to harvest for medicine. We never intend to harvest for magic or work with them magically. And the relationship is just different, right? Like, I've definitely seen people and myself have experienced doing journey work with houseplants, right? And I recommend. But there's a different vibe. It's a different feeling. It's a different sort of relationship, I think, because of the familiarity, that they're always there. They're always in our space. We don't have to venture out to find them. There's no pilgrimage involved. They're here. So, like Pip mentioned, the relationships can feel more friendly, more casual, less ritualized, less formalized. We see, Easter lily's looking a little weepy. Gonna water the Easter lily and hang out with them for a minute and maybe clean the leaves and, all of that. And it's just this very intimate, familiar relationship that, it feels different than some of the other ones that we have. And that's okay. I think having different iterations of relationships with plants, from the familiar house plant to the tree that we rarely see and there's kind of a sense of awe and reverence, to the plants that we walk by every day outside, that there's a more magico-medicinal relationship. There's a lot of variation, and I think it's cool to engage with as many points therein as possible. One bit that I will give here about houseplants is that they are not growing in the soil, and probably never have, meaning outside soil, like in the earth, an infinite depth of soil. They are growing, and probably have since their cloning or seeding or whatever, they're growing in a container. Yeah? Containers are made by human hands. This is something humans do. We contain, we wall off, we separate, we define, we analyze, we give structure to things, right? We move into a space and build a house, and then we build a wall or a fence around that area, around the garden, around the property. This is something we do. So houseplants, for me, move over into the realm of the plants that grow within a walled garden. And in the folklore, there is a differentiation of spirit, in a differentiation of deities. For example, we would see, if we look at Greco-Roman pagan deities, for example, as a very loose class here, because this goes really deep, we would see Pan as being a god of the wild, the untamed, favoring wild trees, using copses of trees and wild places and hedgerows and thickets as his haunts, where he likes to be. Unpredictable, trickstery, right? Like wild nature. Not always sure what you're going to get. You're not in control. Nature is doing what nature does. Panned back, nature is beautiful. In close, there's some intensity, right? Some intensity to nature. So we have Pan outside of the garden wall. And who do we have as the deity guarding plants inside of the garden wall? Very little known fact about the folklore of this particular deity. Aphrodite, right? We have Aphrodite as the goddess of relationship and beauty and moving between liminal spaces from the ocean to the garden. who stands as a very different energy, a very different personality to Pan, yes? Or the satyrs, or Sylvanus, any number of sort of pan-Greco-Roman deities of plants. So Aphrodite is the walled garden, and she's involved with the life of those plants in a contained and controlled and often harmonized space, where there's design. Things are put where they look aesthetically pleasing, where there's beauty. This is very Aphrodite, right? So for me, the houseplants are in that domain. They're more in the domain of an Aphrodite type patron deity, and a walled garden type feeling, and a walled garden type connection to humans, whereas we're co-creating together. We created the vessel, the plant is growing in the vessel. They're more dependent on us because we've got to feed them and change their soil and water them and turn them and make sure they're getting light. It breeds a different kind of softness in the relationship, a different type of familiarity. So just a bit of a tangent there. But anyway, very cool question. And houseplants, definitely hang out with them and see, they are watching you do your life in a way that the plants growing in the wild maybe don't. So they can be very good allies to turn to for very human problems, because they are there watching you while you sleep, watching you while you eat, watching you while you navigate emotions and life and wellness and illness and all the things. They are in the walled garden. They're more on the human side, and they understand us. So, show your houseplants all the love. They deserve it. So we'll wrap up there. Thanks everybody for submitting such great questions. I post a question call on my Patreon every month on the 20th, and all of the questions that come in get turned into this video. So if you've got some cues, pop over and we'll get you in the next one. Until then, many blessings of peace and plenty. Thanks for being here. I'll see you guys next time.